Welcome, everybody. Greetings. Welcome. Come on in. Put those headphones on. Turn this thing up as loud as you care to listen to it, because I'm going to be all over the place. That's because this is the debut episode of the Weekly Trim with yours beardly, the one and only Redbeard. Not just the one and only, just the guy who happens to be calling himself Redbeard in the Mid-Atlantic region anyway. Because God knows there are plenty of other guys who've called themselves Redbeard at one point in time or another. Trust me, it's the hardest username in the world to try and get any kind of a claim to. I've done as best I can to get every email address you can with some variation of Redbeard in there. They're all spoken for. They're all gone. I wind up having to put a 3 for the second E usually for one of my usernames, but sometimes it just is what it is. And that said, thank you for joining us on the program here this evening. This is the April 13th, 2018 episode of the program, and to be quite honest with you, I am just plain glad to be able to talk to you folks, because I really have missed doing a podcast. Now, you'll probably be wondering, what is this show about? And really and truly, I'm not quite sure yet. I know there's going to be some variety to this. I know it's probably going to be wrestling heavy because, let's face facts, I'm kind of the wrestling guy, or one of the wrestling guys, and that's just a major topic that I'm into and that I appreciate. But there will also be a lot of other things. There'll be some life stuff. We'll talk music. We'll talk movies. We'll talk all kinds of things. It just kind of depends on what's suiting my fancy on the given week. And this is hopefully, and I will say hopefully, going to be a weekly show to where we come back and we get some new content out here once a week. I think that is a pretty stable and a pretty generous expectation, given my schedule being what it is these days in terms of work and personal life and whatnot. I don't think it's out of the ordinary to have a podcast that does a once-a-week broadcast. So we'll see how it goes. It may wind up being once every 2 weeks. It may wind up being once a month. It just kind of depends on where things are. But we're going to try. We're going to give it the old college try, as they say. And, you know, it is what it is. We're going to have fun with it. And we hope to continue the lineage of sort of representing the shows that put us to where we are, that I've produced and that I've been involved with. Of course, if you've followed this channel for any length of time, you're familiar with the Rasslin with Redbeard vlog series, which is ongoing. It is sort of on a little bit of a hiatus right now, but it's only because of the fact that we have gotten to a point with a lot of the promotions and a lot of the shows in this area to where we've covered most of them. Now, there are some that are off the beaten path that are just sort of out of our range to where we'd have to almost, arrange a hotel stay in order to go and check those shows out. But at the same time, we would like to get to them eventually. Some of the promotions up in the further reaches of North Carolina, which that makes it sounds like it's on the other side of Mars, but it might as well be. Because there are some promotions up there that are just really far off based on where we are here in the Midlands of South Carolina. But in getting back to talking about Rasslin with Redbeard, we are going to do more of those shows. We will be bringing more content of that nature to you as we discover more new promotions as they come along, because that was the whole idea with Rasslin with Redbeard. We wanted to give the details of my experience and of the experience of others in going to shows. And it just seemed really repetitive to take you to action-packed wrestling in Chester repetitively, or to PWX, or to Old School Championship Wrestling, or wherever, because we've covered those. Their shows, not to say that their matches are the same or whatnot, but the actual experience of going to them is, by and large, the same. There's not a whole lot of variation there. You might pick up something new here and there occasionally, but it is what it is. These shows don't change a whole lot in terms of the venue, in terms of the fan experience, because they're pretty consistent, and that's not a bad thing. So it is what it is. In regard to some of our other content, we had the midweek update, which was a weekly show that I did. It was a video-based program. That show I enjoyed doing, but it was very labor-intensive in terms of getting the graphics together and editing the program, and it got to a point where it was really a hassle. I enjoyed it, but it was too much work to get that whole thing together on a weekly basis, because what I was really doing was I was taking time out from my work schedule to put some of that stuff together, and it started to eat into some of the responsibilities that I had. And plus, I was a little frustrated creatively because I wanted to do things with that show in terms of improving the look and feel of it that I just couldn't do. I didn't have the technology, I didn't have the camera, the backdrop, the software, whatever you want to say. I just didn't have it. So we kind of have pushed that show to the wayside. I doubt it will ever come back. We did enjoy it, but it's just one of those things where, like I say, a little too labor intensive to actually get a good show out there each and every week, and I didn't want to half-ass the thing. I really did not want to just throw something out there for the sake of saying, okay, we're doing this show because we have to. And somewhat along those same lines, the Rebels, Rogues, and Redbeards podcast, which we were doing with our cast of characters we had there, Andrew Silly, Anwar Perez, and Joseph McGee. I love those guys to death. They were a lot of fun to work with. But in trying to arrange a schedule to where the three of us could get together and actually record, it was really challenging. And it, even more so than that, became, again, a frustration from a technological standpoint because none of us were local. We were all spread to the wind. Those three guys were in North Carolina. I'm down here in South Carolina. So we were using Skype and a couple other pieces of software in order to make the whole thing work. And it, again, was just frustrating because sometimes you'd have somebody who had a fritzy internet connection, or Skype wouldn't cooperate, or the software that I used to record didn't want to do what it was supposed to. That's the technical way of describing this application that I use not really cooperating, not doing what it's supposed to, in other words. It just, it was fun, but here again, one of those things where it became taxing not only on me, but my wife as well, because we have our son, and we were recording that show late at night, and she was having to take time away from some of the things that she's involved with, and it wasn't really working. So this being what it is, it's a one-man show now. We may have guests. I won't ever put that by the wayside to say we won't do that kind of thing, but this being just me, it's a lot easier because I can get in, get out, hopefully get this done and not inconvenience a tribe of other people with what I want to do creatively. And, that may come off offensive to some people. I really don't mean it to be that towards any of the people I've worked with in the past, because God knows I enjoyed working with those guys on Rebels, Rogues, and Redbeards, and everybody else that I've dealt with in the past creatively in whatever venture it might have been. But this is just easier at this point in time, especially when it comes to working with audio as opposed to video. So we're going to see how this goes. And what do we hope to accomplish with this show? Well, this is where we might rub some more people the wrong way. And what I mean by that is we're going to try and get away from the panhandling and some of the buddy-buddy podcast trends that have taken hold in the local scene when it comes to addressing professional wrestling anyway. It's just one of these things where I've noticed as there have become more podcasts that have gotten off the ground in this area, some of them are very, we'll say, pointed and directed towards supporting certain groups and not the entire scene, or they do a good job of supporting most of the scene, but not the whole thing. It is what it is. Everybody's got their objective. You can do whatever you want to do on your own show, but we're not going to do that. We're not going to be one of these shows who says, okay, well, so-and-so had a great show, and it wound up that it was actually the drizzling you-know-whats, and they drew 20 people and this, that, and the other. We would sooner tell people the honest-to-God impression of what we're experiencing, of what we're seeing, of what our impressions are of the product as a whole in this area. Because I think that's an honest and very open way of having dialogue. We're not trying to be here and bust balls. We're here to actually talk about what's going on. And if that means calling a spade and saying somebody had a bad show, somebody had a bad match, somebody mailed it in, guess what? We're going to let you know, because quite frankly, I think that's what people deserve. And I think that is the kind of thing that is needed in this scene, because podcasts are what they are, people's opinions are what they are, but the unabashed opinion of someone like myself also has a point of being in this mix as well. So that's what we're hoping to do as far as that kind of thing is concerned. In relation to other content, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things. We're going to talk about music, movies, maybe some video games if I can ever manage to get back to my Xbox at some point in time. It's gathering a little bit of dust back there in the bedroom. Like I said, I have a 3-year-old, and he takes up a lot of our time, but he's a bundle of joy, and we love him to death. But he sure does cut into my Xbox time. Maybe at some point in time, whenever he gets to a stage in his life where he enjoys playing video games, we can get back into doing that together and really enjoy it. So, but as it is, we're going to talk about whatever comes to mind. We're going to talk about all kinds of things. And in this opening show, we've got a combination of things that we want to get into and start talking about and just sort of crack the ice and see where it goes from here. So all that having been said, we're going to take a brief musical interlude here, and we will be back in a few short moments with segment number 2 of the debut episode of the Weekly Trim with yours beardly, Redbeard. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you enjoy the program, if you enjoy the channel, go ahead and click that like button, give us a big thumbs up, and also remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment. Appreciate it. Be back in a few.
No telling how far I'll go. I know everybody on this island seems so happy on this island. Everything is by design. I know everybody on this island has a role on this island, so maybe I can roll with mine. I can lead with pride, I can make us strong. I'll be satisfied if I play along, but the voice inside sings a different song. What is wrong with me? See the light as it shines on the sea. It's blinding, but no one knows how deep it goes. And it seems like it's calling out to me, so come find me and let me know what's beyond that line. Will I cross that line? Come on!
ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate you hanging around with me and for sticking around through that musical interlude there. That's one thing we do want to try and continue with the show, is to set up a bit of a precedent in bringing some cool music to you guys. I'm a big fan of cover tunes. I like to hear a band from a different genre than a original piece take a gander at that work and make it their own. In some cases, it turns out better than others. I've got a lot of favorites, though, in terms of this style of music, so that's one thing I hope to do as a consistent piece of this program, is to bring those cover tunes in here and show off what we're talking about there in looking at all kinds of cool music. And again, I'm a big fan of metal and hard rock, so that's probably where a majority of it's going to come from, but you never know. If it's something cool that I find on YouTube or online, I'll bring it to you. So just be aware of the fact that we're going to have some eclectic music, and a lot of it's going to be cover offerings. So here we go. Into segment number 2 of the program here today. And what we're talking about now is a very startling thing that really, I'll say, interrupted my Friday night. Because PWX, that's Premier Wrestling Experience, unfortunately had to cancel the event that they were to be hosting tonight, April 13th, 2018, in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which is going to be called Schoolhouse Rock. They had to cancel the show at the extreme last minute. And this was to have been a benefit event for one of the local schools there in the Rock Hill area. And more than that, in terms of the history of this company, it was to have been the first show that they had run in South Carolina since, I believe, November of 2012. They were going on 6 years here since they had been a promotion that was relevant here in South Carolina. They've been relevant for God knows how long in North Carolina, because they're one of 2 top companies, as far as I'm concerned, that run in that state. But here in South Carolina, they had not been a part of the scene for close to a decade, you might as well go ahead and say. And one of the last shows that they ran here in South Carolina was in my old hometown of Lancaster. And this was to have been their return show. It looked to have been a great card as well. There was a match on there that I was really looking forward to seeing, that being Drew Adler versus the Southern Savior, John Schuyler. I've been angling to see those two in a contest really and truly ever since I became aware of Drew Adler, and him coming over from the Georgia wrestling scene to South Carolina and to the Carolinas as a whole. If you're not familiar with Drew, he's a phenomenal athlete, looks like a very young sort of Randy Orton in terms of his physique. He's got all the attributes of somebody who will be able to make that step to the next level if that's what he wants to really pursue in his wrestling career. But I knew, looking at him and John, the way they both work and the way they're both able to just emote in the ring and deliver top quality matches, I knew whenever they finally wound up facing one another that it was going to be an amazing contest. And unfortunately, it's at least not going to happen for now. I know it will happen at some point in time, but it's not happening this evening because, here again, the show was canceled. And I have to say that there was a part of me, and you'll as this show goes on, you'll start to understand that a lot of what I tend to have in my own brain is because of the fact that, in terms of my opinions anyway, is because of the fact that I am a conspiracy theorist at my very core. I tend to look for ulterior motives whenever I'm dealing with anyone that I don't necessarily trust or know all that much. It's just my natural way of handling things. That's all I can really describe it as being. But in looking at me being that kind of person, in what we're going to talk about a lot of times, I will say is rumor and speculation. And there was a part of me that when this happened, I was thinking, oh God, please don't let this be some type of good old boy stab at trying to say, hey, new guy, this is how it's done here in South Carolina. This is how it's done, baby. You got to get over with the commission. You got to get over with the promoters down here before you can ever be a part of the scene. That's me doing some kind of really grungy promoter sleazeball impression. I don't know who that was supposed to be, but it's kind of half McMahon, half redneck, whatever. But that kind of thing has gone on down here. because we have the athletic commission, we have licensing issues, we have people who have tried to get over on other promoters based on whether or not they were running a legal show with legal talent, whether or not they had a permit to be in a specific building. All that stuff has happened here. So there was a point where when I first heard that the show was canceled, I thought, geez, that's what's going on here? It can't. Not with a company like PWX. They had to have had all their, T's crossed and lowercase j's dotted. But, in this case, it definitely does not seem to have been that. And while I'm glad it was not that, I am also very saddened by the reason that it appears to have been. Unfortunately, this was to have taken place at a American Legion Hall there in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And according to multiple news reports, about a week and a half ago, there was unfortunately a homicide at this venue. There was from what I can gather from reading various news items online, there was a party of some type at the facility, and a young man who was 24 years old, unfortunately, was shot and killed there at the venue. The young man's name was Eric Levon Williams, and he was from what I read, according to, let's see what the source was on this, I don't want to misquote someone. According to the Herald Online, I believe it was, he was a full-time South Carolina Army National Guardsman. So, just a terrible thing. You hate to hear of any loss of life, especially a situation like this where this was a man who had dedicated himself. Obviously I don't know him, but still, the fact that he was a guardsman lets you know that he had dedicated himself to trying to help others. And not only that, he evidently had several children. So as a father, I especially was hit hard by that bit of news. And you just have to be understanding of something like this, because more than likely what's going on here is an attempt to continue the investigation and continue to improve security at this venue. Because from what I gathered, the permits that were associated with the show were pulled by the city of Rock Hill. They didn't give a whole lot of real details, PWX didn't, in terms of what was going on here behind the scenes, but they don't have to, of course. Other than to say that it was related to a decision based on the city's direction and where they wanted to go with this thing. And it, like I say, in continuing to speculate about this, it could have been because of the fact that there's an ongoing investigation with this. They do not have a suspect, evidently, in this situation, which is even more tragic, because you hate to hear of loss of life, but even more so, you hate to think that this might go down as an unsolved crime. And that's just terrible. The whole circumstances with this are just absolutely terrible. I feel for the family. I feel for the children. And I can't say anything more than that in terms of just plain hating this whole thing, because sure, we lost a show, but guess what? Those two kids lost their daddy. And that's the most tragic thing in the world, in my opinion, because I hear of stories like this, and it breaks my heart to think, as a father, if my little boy, something were to happen to me and my little boy had to grow up without a daddy. I would hope that my wife would go on to marry some dude who's way better looking than me and to earn a whole lot more money than I do and give her a great life. But at the same time, I really hate it for those children, and it really breaks my heart that those two kids, because of this act of heinous violence by someone out there, will no longer be able to hug their daddy and tell him hello and do all those things that kids look forward to doing with their fathers. So it is what it is. This world can be awfully cold at times, folks. And this is definitely a situation where you have the just plain old scum of the earth showing themselves. But in trying to put a more positive cap on the end of this thing here and talking about this show and the circumstances that surround it, PWX has already moved on to promoting their next event, which will be, I believe, April 23rd, 2018, over in Gastonia, North Carolina, at the National Guard Armory there. The Gas House, as I think they refer to it. that is a great venue. That is a fantastic place for wrestling. I've seen a number of cards there, not only from PWX, but also from some other promotions. It's a great building. Not the best parking scenario in the world, but especially when you draw in the kind of crowds that a company like PWX does. But at the same time, it's a great venue, and I'm sure they'll put together a great card for that show there. And I believe the title of it is going to be called Next Level, and should be another top-notch event from PWX, Premier Wrestling Experience. If you want more information on it and all their upcoming events, go on and check them out on Facebook. You can just search PWX Wrestling, and that'll take you straight to their page. All right, that all having been said, folks, that's going to wrap up the second segment of the show. We appreciate you tuning in. We're going to take another musical break here, and we'll be back with segment number 3 here of the debut episode of The Weekly Trim with Redbeard. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
What I heard her say. Songs are told to murder, but I must find my way. Let my heart go. Let your song go. Mama, let my in my veins, paper strings around my neck, amongst the remains. Left home at an early age, what I heard was wrong. Never asked forgiveness, what he said is done. Let my
Welcome back, folks. Thank you for sticking around with us here on the Weekly Trim with me, your host, the one and only, yours beardly, Redbeard. Appreciate you tuning in, as we said there, and appreciate you enjoying the show and enjoying the content we have here on the YouTube channel. Some people say, well, it's a podcast. How can you put that on a hosting application that's based around video? Well, guess what? The way I see it, we're not really just talking about video anymore. When we're talking about stuff of this nature, we're talking about data and content. Data more specifically. Everything these days is data. Doesn't matter if it's video, audio, text, whatever, it's data ultimately. So in that regard, does it matter if it's on YouTube? Does it matter if it's on a podcasting host? No, because guess what? Your phone can still get to it. Your computer can still get to it. Your laptop, your tablet, your whatever can still get to it because it's all data. So now that I've gotten on a soapbox regarding that subject, somebody kick that thing out from under me. Please, help me. That's something that I'm probably going to have a recurring issue with on this show, as well as the fact that I not only like to run my mouth, but that occasionally, it's not that often, but occasionally something will set me off to where I just feel like I have to go and make it known how I feel about a given topic or subject or whatever it is. And that was something that I heard brought up at one point in time. Well, how can you put a podcast on a video hosting service? Guess what? It doesn't matter. This just happens to be what I know, what I have a lot of content already on, and like I said, it's all ultimately data. So just enjoy your show, put your show on whatever service you are paying for. I'm not paying anything for this one at all, so there you go. It is what it is. But all that having been said, now that I've gotten totally off on a tangent and away from what I wanted to talk about here in segment number 3 of the debut episode of this here program, The Weekly Trim with Redbeard, I want to talk about some new music. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, you guys will start to learn more about my tastes and about my likes and dislikes. But I am a big fan of heavy metal and hard rock and things of that nature. I listen to all kinds of music, though. I like outlaw country. I like stuff like Daft Punk and various things from like the trance and dance scene, whatever you want to call it, the electronic music scene. There's very little that I won't at least try. And I'll tell you one of my most favorite things that I've heard here recently. It's the soundtrack from The Greatest Showman. And it's not because of the fact that my wife plays it ad nauseum in her car while we're riding around. It's actually a fantastic piece of work by some people who are tremendously talented. And they're not mainstream artists, all of them. Some of them are. You got, of course, the actors who were involved in that movie, like Hugh Jackman, doing their vocal parts for those songs. But really just a phenomenal piece of work. Another thing that I saw here recently, I know I'm still getting off on a tangent here, but another thing that I saw here recently was the recent NBC broadcast of Jesus Christ Superstar. Wow. Just wow. If you've not seen that, the Alice Cooper parts alone were worth tuning into the entire broadcast. But the whole thing there, just an amazing assemblage of talent, of beauty in terms of the wardrobe and the set pieces and just the pacing and all the great stuff that goes into a stage production like that. Really worth your time. Doesn't matter what your religious beliefs may be, still would be worth it, in my opinion, to check out that new version that NBC produced there of Jesus Christ Superstar. In kind of diametrically opposed, I guess you could say, to a show with that subject matter is what we're going to talk about now, and that being I don't want to call them a pure Finnish black metal band, but we're talking about Ghost and their new release, which is the debut single off of the new album Prequel. I'm hoping I don't butcher that pronunciation because I'm sure it's some level of Latin or French possibly, but this is the song Rats off of this new album, which is due June 1st of this year. The debut single here, the internet and radio really took off with this thing because Ghost has gotten a whole, just a promotional machine behind them in terms of the gimmick and the aura that this band has been able to come up with in the story that they generate behind Papa Emeritus and the Nameless Ghouls and all the tribulation that's going on behind the scenes with guys being hired and fired, and Tobias Forge, who has played Papa Emeritus to this point in time, who's now shifted to playing this other role of the Cardinal, him being the overlord that he seemingly is and directing this band. It's just very interesting to see all that goes on into this band producing their music, and their music itself, I'll be honest, it's catchy as hell. Is it really groundbreaking? Not necessarily. It's good. It's entertaining. It's fun to listen to by and large, even with some of the topics and some of the subject matter being on the end of things where it could be, pretty hardcore into the black metal, we love the devil kind of sentiment. But it's more to me of the ability to enjoy the guitars and the drums and that kind of thing, because I can push lyrics to the side. It's there. You're not going to be able to not listen to it, obviously, but at the same time, you don't have to let it affect you and let it warp whatever perception you may have of a given topic. It just is what it is. But in talking about this new single, Rats, the impression here that I have is that this is going to be the first of several songs that set sort of a tone in this album. We'll say talking about maybe I'd say the stories of revelation from the Bible, because if you watch the video, it's very clear that this is talking about things like plagues and rats who spread disease, and especially at the very end of the video where the Cardinal mounts a pale horse. Of course, if you talk about a pale horse, you can't not think about, if you're at all familiar with the Bible anyway, you cannot think about the verse from Scripture in Revelation where it talks about death riding a pale horse and hell rode with him. And that just plays purely into the kind of symbology that this band has used in the past. The song being what it is, the video being what it is, I found it very entertaining. This is definitely going to be, I think, a point of contention for a lot of Ghost fans, because this is not Papa. This is not the same thing that we've seen here for a couple of albums now. This is going to be a little bit different. And that's not bad. This is them continuing to reinvent themselves and to continue to be interesting for various reasons. And that's the kind of thing that a band has to do in this genre in particular, to not be thought of as stale. And you cannot label them as that in any way, shape, or form. Now, I will say this. I am a fan, but having seen them perform live once, I saw them open for Iron Maiden in Charlotte, North Carolina last year. Great show, but I have some question in terms of their ability to perform, especially when I'm talking about them. I'm talking about Papa, the Cardinal, Tobias Forge, whatever you want to call him. I'm talking about him specifically in terms of his vocals and his vocal range. You can do whatever you want to in a studio. If I knew what I was doing with this software, I could probably make myself sound like Elvis Presley. But I can't, because I don't know what I'm doing, other than hitting record on this thing. But with him, I think there's a bit of a gap between live Papa or Cardinal and recorded versions of him. So that's my continued concern in, addressing and being honest with how I look at this band. It'd be one thing if it was close, but when I saw them last year, it was pretty far off. And they had been on tour for a while. It's one of those things where it could be a situation where just time on the road had begun to affect him, but whatever. You've got to be able to deliver a pretty consistent performance if you're going to be a touring band whatsoever, especially if you're opening for a group like Iron Maiden. I mean, come on, it is what it is there, folks. But even so, I'm looking forward to hearing the remainder of this album. As we said, I am a fan of this band. I do look forward to new content from them, especially, in telling the story that they have in the arrival of the Cardinal. It's something that, you know, a lot of bands get, I'll say, they get fed into the mill by a lot of people online for having this gimmick and for having these sort of storylines and presentations to the Ghouls and to Papa the Cardinal. But really and truly, you know, if you look back into the history of heavy metal and of this genre overall, there have been a number of people who have done this successfully and have done it quite well. And we're talking, you know, I mentioned Alice Cooper here a minute ago. You have guys like him, Rob Zombie, Marilyn Manson, even Rob Halford from Judas Priest. You know, they all had some type of presentation, or of course Kiss. You know, they all had some type of presentation that went above and beyond just the music. And that adds a lot to it, in my opinion. I think that's a great thing because you're talking about another level of talent, another level of exposure, another level of creativity that can continue to attract people to this genre of music. So whatever you can do to bring in more fans, I'm all for, in my opinion. And like I said, I'm looking forward to hearing more from this album and more from this band. Looking forward to hopefully maybe seeing them live in this part of the world here again as well, because I'm sure they'll be touring in the very near future now that they've got a new album out. So, with all that having been said, we're going to take one more musical break here, and then we'll be back to wrap up this here first ever episode of the Weekly Trim with Redbeard. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Appreciate all your time and for being a part of this show. We'll be back in a few moments. Welcome back, everybody. Thank you very much for sticking all the way through this part in the show. We realize that we're ironing out things, we're getting our feet wet, we're trying to do the best we can, given the fact that we have no idea what in the world we're doing with this show. Just kind of flying by the seat of our pants and having the good time that we hope we are having and that you are having with this show. And we thought that it might be a good way to wrap up this show and to also add some spice to this particular program by having a occasional adult beverage. I am a beer fan. I love a good beer. I'm not the type to just go and get a Budweiser. I'm not, now let me back up and punt. I do not put myself in the category of one of these people who has to have a craft beer. I'm not one of these people who will not drink a Bud Light. I'll drink a Budweiser. I'll drink a Bud Light. Bud Light Lime is actually one of my favorite beers. You get that stuff on the verge of being frozen, man alive, Bud Light Lime, fantastic. It's delicious, goes down easy. Love the little hint of lime in there. It's just easy to drink and a very good beverage in my opinion, especially this time of year where it's getting warmer. You don't want an especially heavy beer. You want something that's easier to drink, and the Bud Light Lime product is really in that spectrum of things. But we wanted to bring out what's Redbeard drinking as a segment on this show where I'll talk about a beer or a beverage. We may alter it. It may be what's Redbeard eating. It may be what's Redbeard doing something else at some point in time. I really couldn't tell you. But for this particular episode, what we're going to do is pop the top on a beverage, and I'm going to give you my honest opinion of this particular beer. Now, what we have here for this segment is I would say this is a fairly new offering from Samuel Adams Brewing. This is what they're calling Sam 76. This weighs in at 4.7 ABV, so not an especially high gravity, or not, well, excuse me, it wouldn't qualify as a high gravity beer, but not especially pungent in terms of the alcohol content. But as we said, this is something that is a relatively new product from Sam Adams. I am a fan of the Sam Adams brand. I do like a lot of their offshoots in terms of the various products that they have out there in the marketplace. One of my favorites is their cherry wheat variety. I love the fact that you have a beer that is subtle and not difficult to drink, but that also has that background note of cherries. It's amazing if you've never had it before. I think it's still available at retailers like Total Wine and More and places like that. You won't typically find it on a lot of store shelves, but in specialty shops like that, I think you can still find it. But definitely would encourage you to check that out. The summer wheat is also a good option there. I do like a lot of wheat beers. The Hefeweizen style beers especially are really good in my opinion. I'm not a fan of really overly hoppy beers. I'm not a IPA guy necessarily. I do like the American style lagers though, something that's more full flavored and it's not watery, like a typical domestic brew. Yingling I can tolerate. It's kind of Yankee Budweiser, to borrow a term there, quote unquote Yankee Budweiser. But still, in looking at my tastes as we bring out this segment of the show, you'll start to see more of what I gravitate towards, but also the fact that I'm open to trying a lot of things. I'm, like I said, not opposed to a Bud Light. I don't know that we'll ever bring a Bud Light, Limerita, Manga, whatever those things are on the show, but who knows? We might try one. One thing I can guarantee you we won't bring on this show, though, is a Four Loko. Holy Christ. I have had enough of those things to know that I do not like a Four Loko. I cannot get into those things whatsoever. It's not, I don't know if it's the maltiness of those drinks or just the fact that they are as high as they are in terms of alcohol content, because some of them are, I think there's a couple of varieties that are around 14% ABV. That's a lot. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Four Loko. But all that having been said, let's get back to what we're talking about here for this segment, which again is the Sam 76 from Samuel Adams Brewing. The description on the label is as follows. Sam 76 is a perfect union of lager and ale, giving you a craft beer with the flavor of an ale and the refreshment and crisp finish of a lager. The result is revolutionary. And it's signed off by Jim Cook, who of course is the founder of Samuel Adams Brewing. So we're going to go ahead and pop this open here, and we're going to give it a taste and see what this particular brew is all about. Just to prove that I'm not kidding around, that was me popping open that particular beer. So let's give it a whiff here and see if we can get some aroma off of this product. Interesting. I will say this, the immediate sensation that I get from absorbing the aroma of this beer is that of grapefruit. I don't know that this has anything related to grapefruit in this, but that is the sensation that I'm getting in giving this a sniff. Let's try it again here. Yep, still getting some notes of grapefruit there, so let's give this a try and see what it actually tastes like. Yep, those grapefruit notes are really coming through there. I would say that this is a very easy to drink beverage. There's not a whole lot of hoppiness here. It is definitely in line with what they're saying there when it combines the attributes of a lager and also of a traditional ale. This is really good. I'm impressed with this. And I will say again that the grapefruit flavor is a little surprising because it's not, a lot of people will probably be terrified when I say it tastes like grapefruit, but it's not like you're biting into a grapefruit here. This is sort of like if you were getting the experience of maybe biting into a grapefruit, but without the bitterness. You get the flavor of the grapefruit, but without the pungency and with all the sort of negative attributes of tasting a fruit of that nature, which is a really interesting thing here. I'm going to have to do a little bit more research into what actually goes into the brew of making this Sam 76, because that's really surprising. Grapefruit just, it doesn't strike me as being something that people would necessarily latch on to or that they would want in a beer like this, but that's very refreshing. I'm very impressed by this, and I definitely will be enjoying this can, and probably, I'll say more than one here this evening as the show and as the evening goes on. So that is our take on Sam 76. Definitely would encourage you, if you can find this in your local grocer or your local convenience store, to give it a shot and get it nice and cold, crack it open, and enjoy a beverage there. So all that having been said, we're going to go ahead and call this show a wrap. We have really had a lot of fun here this evening in putting this thing together. We talked some wrestling, we talked some music, we had some beer, and I probably think we succeeded in pissing a few people off there as well. So overall, I'd have to say this was a successful first show and a successful first outing in our return to podcasting here on the Rasslin with Redbeard YouTube channel. I really do appreciate you guys tuning in and for being a part of the show and for checking this out here. Like I said before in the open, this is a labor of love. This is something that this is something that I really have been looking forward to doing, and I look forward to doing more of these in the future. So if you are a fan of what we're doing here, if you appreciate what we're doing here, please like, share, subscribe, and also comment. I would love to hear from you guys, and also let me know things that you might want me to talk about on this show. If you have a beverage, beer variety, or whatever else that you'd like for me to try, put it in the comments. Would love to hear about it. Would love to try new things here and just continue to build and adapt this show into whatever it might become in the future. So all that having been said, I do appreciate your time. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you for checking out the weekly trim with me, yours beardly, Redbeard. We'll see you next time, folks. Be safe.